George Ferguson, the former Mayor of Bristol. Hi, George.
Hi, Tony.
Yes, so we used to be on the Bristol Community Radio. You came in there many times. We had a difficult time with the present Mayor, that is Marvin Rees, as he came in at the last minute reluctantly on the show, which you were there too, back in, would it be 2016, I think, roughly,
yes,
for the mayoral elections. And he came in only very reluctantly because all the other candidates except him had agreed to come, and at the final moment he agreed to come along. But that's the last time I've seen him, because he didn't want to do any more. All the time he was mayor, didn't want to do any more interviews. So literally I was left in the position where I was having to sort of grab clips of him speaking from other people, and even, this crazy situation of having to doorstep the mayor. The mayor's office didn't want to talk to me at all. It was a very different picture when you were around, George. Even though I was quite critical of some of the things you were up to, you were a bit more open. So there's a different flavour now with Marvin Rees the mayor than George Ferguson the mayor, isn't there?
Well, I was a lot more open. I'm amazed, actually. If you are the mayor, you want to engage with people. That is the point. It's somebody that is visible, who people feel belongs to them and the city, and is their servant. And so it is a bit arrogant to try and stand above that. I think it's vitally important.
Yeah, I mean, I would say what we're seeing is, having been doing this job for 30, 35 years now, is what we're seeing is a kind of corporate attitude, because the corporations, they sit there and their PR people or their advisors, their marketing people say, well, we actually don't think it's a good idea that you go and share a platform with this person because they could embarrass you. And of course, if that happens, nowadays, with the online world, something like that can go viral. It can be terrible for your reputation. So they're trying to, it's almost as if Bristol City Council now has become this kind of brand which needs protecting.
Well, that's very dangerous. And I think openness is always the best policy, and especially in public life. If people are not open, then there's always suspicion about why they're hiding. And so I get complaints from some of the councillors that there's not even openness to the council and the councillors, and that there is a little cabal that is running this city from the mayor's office, and it doesn't get proper scrutiny. And the media is part of that scrutiny. So you shouldn't pick and choose which media you're going to cooperate with. One should be open for all questions. I've never been afraid about that. I've never been afraid about people criticising. I think you get better governance when you know what people think.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, that I mention that a close personal friend of the Mayor, Marvin Rees, was our station manager at Bristol Community FM. He's perfectly entitled to have his wealth, of course, but he wasn't your average, what you might call, community person. He had a very expensive car. He'd got loads of property in Spain, this sort of things, and he was a wealthy guy, very, very pally with the Mayor. So, of course, it suits them that I'm no longer on FM. But let's not go down that road right now, because there's all sorts of more important things for the whole city to talk about. One of the most important at the moment is the fallout, I suppose, from the toppling of the Edward Colston statue. Because I'd like you to tell us, George, why didn't you make sure that statue was gone? Because people were lobbying for it when you were mayor.
Well, show me that lobbying. I never felt real pressure about that. I did feel pressure about the name change of the Colston Hall, and I addressed that. I'm sorry that I didn't manage to achieve that change, but you got in time, but it was ready to change when I went. So I'm really surprised that it took a riot and a toppling of a statue to change the name of the Colston Hall to Bristol Beacon. And I'd made it it was an understanding, a condition that the £10 million grant that I was then agreeing to the Colston Hall, to the Bristol Music Trust, which owns the Colston Hall, which meant that I couldn't directly change things, but I was able to use a grant as leverage in order to get that name change.
Is that a bribe?
It's leverage in order to get a name change.
It's a deal. Basically, it's a deal.
But what I really wanted is somebody else to match that 10 million and then be part of the name choosing. But that didn't happen. But that's possibly why it held on a bit longer than it should have done. But, I mean, I honestly, and I can't find it, and I've looked back and I've thought, why didn't we address the statue issue? During my 3.5 years, I didn't have pressure on removing that statue.
What about the principle, though? Because all around the world, people have been saying that the people of Bristol are wanting to erase history, and the police have gone along with it, and the courts.
Well, I think it was a huge relief the statue came down. It solved a problem. I mean, it was a problem to Marvin. There may have been more pressure on Marvin, and actually maybe he was in a situation where he thought, as a black mayor, maybe it's not very good that I take it down, because that might be then, might be an overreaction. So actually, the people taking it down, well, let's call it the people taking it down, was actually a really good, swift solution. And suddenly, over a matter of minutes, Bristol changed. And over a matter of hours, Bristol was global. And that was an amazing moment, and something we need to grasp and see as a good moment, I think.
Martin Summers, what do you make of this? Because it did certainly have ramifications around the world. It was a massive news story, caused an enormous amount of debate about what is our history.
Well, I was actually there, and I saw it happen. I didn't actually help to pull it down, but I was standing not far away. I thought the police...
Did you have your hands on your hips, or were you cheering?
I was cheering, like most of the rest of the people watching. I think the policing on the day was very professional. They realised there was a large crowd there. It was very peaceful, but it was very determined. And if they'd attempted to stop what was happening, could have been all sorts of problems, which they didn't do. They videoed what was happening for future reference. And also, the mayor, we mentioned Marvin, he had actually he'd banned all traffic from the centre of the city that day, so that in actual fact the demonstration didn't have to deal with traffic. So in other words, there was a kind of a nod and a wink, if you like, from authority. And of course nobody was hurt. The statue is now, because this came out in the trial, is now worth millions. It was worth, so the criminal damage charge is rather bizarre, because of course the people who pulled the statue down have made it far more worth financially than it was as a statue where it was. And I think the jury made the right decision, and that's how politics is supposed to work in a democracy. There were some people there who wanted to defend the cenotaph, as they called it, and we had a sort of chat with them as we marched by. The various discussions with them. There's only a handful of them. The police just watched that discussion to make sure nobody did anything out of order, and nobody did. And I think the whole passage of events has been extremely educational for Bristol and elsewhere.
George, the main thing really, I think, is Colston's role as a merchant venturer, a slave trader. The slave trade supposedly abolished. A lot of people now saying, actually, the debt that people are plunged into is a form of slavery still, although people aren't actually in chains. There is a form of wage slavery, debt slavery still prevalent. But the merchant venturers, of whom Colston was one, a master, and a slave trader, these people put themselves across as great philanthropists. Of course, most of the money that they were making was from slavery, and really an immoral. It's like dirty money, basically. And this was used to found various institutions in the city. There's an aspect of all of this which is out of sight, out of mind. Most people, in Bristol at the time didn't know what was going on abroad necessarily, and it was kept way away from Bristol. The triangular trade made sure that really the Bristolians never saw the slaves, for example, strapped to ships and tied to ships and this kind of thing. So what do you make of the merchant venturers? Because they're a very secretive organisation then, and they're a secretive organisation still, and you yourself were one of them.
I was, until 10 years ago, when I resigned because I was standing for mayor, and I just thought it will not be seen to be good to be a merchant or to be part of any other organisation while I was mayor, because I think, and to a certain extent it was a relief to be able to do that. I think most of the merchants that remain are good people who have Bristol's future at heart and Bristol's best interests at heart. So I think if we going to operate as one city, and the mayor is very keen on this one city thing, it's got to be one city for everybody. It can't be one city for some. And so I think we need the merchants to be part of the process of change. The merchants recognise the importance of that, and I think can make a positive contribution now to the reparations, whether monetary or otherwise, that need to be found and put to good use in this city for the benefit of the ancestors. Oh no, not the inheritors of the whole situation.
Well, the merchants say they're already doing that they already contribute much more to Bristol than that they take. The only trouble is, of course, it's not transparent. There's no way that I or you or anyone else can really just look at their books and say, all right, well, this is where you're getting your money from, this is where you're spending it, and we can see you really are helping the city. Yeah,
I know they have farmland, they have property, and they have shares, like any organisation. They work basically as a charity. The membership pay enough to cover their own costs, for the odd dinner or whatever it is. And so, most of the money that comes from their investments, nearly all of it, goes into the welfare of old people and youth. And I think, and education. One can argue, and I think Christine, who you had on last week, would argue that that education is not necessarily of a form that she would agree with. But in general, they now are doing a very, very different job than the merchants of the 18th, 19th century.
I mean, Christine pointed out, this is years ago, that there was a horrific Ofsted inspection at the Merchants Academy, and one of the secondary schools they run, which, it's just, at least, I'm not sure about this world, but she was saying that many other schools would have been closed. They managed to carry on and they've soldiered through, and now apparently they're crawling back up the Ofsted leagues again. So,
they changed the leadership of that school, and they changed the governing board, they changed the head, and so they took very fast action, and I think they were shocked by that.
But do you think this sort of organisation is compatible with Bristol as a democratic, open, modern city? It's the secrecy that bugs me, and it's the sort of, the whiff of Freemasonry.
Well, I'm not sure.
But you've got the master, haven't you? The master who runs the whole thing for the year. Then you've got the senior warden for next year, the junior warden for next year.
I'm not very au fait with all that, because I never got to
You never got
fights.
asked to be even a junior warden. Oh, well, never mind. But, these are all Masonic terms, and there is this whiff of Freemasonry and secrecy about it, and about PR again, and that's what I see in City Hall now. I see an organisation that's trying to sell itself to the public rather than open its doors and do whatever is best in the public interests in front of the public.
Yeah, I would say they're more open than the mayor's office, and you can see who all the members are, and you can get some background on all the members, so that's all available. I don't know whether you can see the individual shares that they are invested in, but their main resource is farmland.
Well, you see a lot of them popping up, George. You see a lot of them popping up as directors on public utilities, the same utilities which were privatised by Margaret Thatcher. The people that do the water, the gas, Bristol Water, these sorts of places. So it's almost as if every time you turn the tap on or switch a light on, the merchants are taking their little cut somewhere. Yeah,
I know you take that line. I don't think there's any conspiracy there. I think it is an organisation you wouldn't invent now, but
shouldn't they
you definitely wouldn't invent it now. But it has a history, and it has it's part of Bristol. I think it's better to work with it than against it, and I think they can do a lot of good, because they know they're challenged, and I think that will drive them to doing more good than than if they weren't being challenged.
I wish they were more challenged. This whole Colston business has challenged them. But, I'd like to see more scrutiny. And, of course, it's very difficult to scrutinise an invisible... maybe something like...
it's not that invisible.
Bringing them into the, within the realms of the Companies Act, rather than, a Royal Charter organisation, which is only scrutinised by the Privy Council.
I do think that would be absolutely right. I mean, I think it was brave of Marty Burgess to join. I say brave because, she got a lot of stick for that. But I think it helps build bridges. And I have talked to other members of the African and Caribbean community in Bristol about it. And I think that many would prefer to work with them to work out where we go from here, rather than just drive them underground.
Okay, so the other thing, a really important aspect to the city at the moment is the burgeoning tower blocks. There's even Matthew Montague Pollock has set up a campaign a couple of years ago, which is attracting a lot of interest and attention and brains, which is this anti-tower block campaign, because it seems we've got these little almost springing up like Topsy across the city. Of course, what a speculator wants is as many stories as possible, as many square feet as possible, or yards or metres, in a very valuable area of the city. And that seems to be what they're getting now.
I know. I'm shocked by what's going on. I'm absolutely shocked. I mean, I'm an architect, and we have a really attractive city. We made some terrible mistakes after the war, 60s, 70s, built some horrible things around Lewins Mead that destroyed the skyline from some directions. But we still have a wonderful city. We have we've got about nearly 5,000 listed buildings in the city, not far less than Bath, for instance. We are... the reason why people like living in Bristol is because of its character. And we are now under assault. We are losing that character to commercial pressure that's being encouraged by the mayor. And I said I'm taking my gloves off this year.
Hang on a minute, because he's not encouraging it. It's actually the central government that's encouraging it, but by trying to relax planning regulations.
No, I'm sorry, he is encouraging it. He has said, I want to see height. He has said, any city with any ambition needs high buildings. He is being influenced by American planning rather than by European planning, because that is where he comes from in his mind. And he, as his short stay at Yale, I think, had a big influence on him. And so I think we are in danger of making all those mistakes that we were making in the 60s and 70s, trying to be Birmingham rather than Bristol. And it is incredibly destructive. Yes, he's encouraging. He is saying, look, if you want high buildings, just apply. And there is no proper guidance about where these buildings should go. We now have a planning application that was passed just for Christmas for 9 and 8 story office blocks right adjacent to the most historic part of the city, that are 3 times as high as the prevailing buildings, that are the equivalent of a 9-story commercial building is equivalent of a 15-story residential building. The other end of Castle Park, when I left office, there was going to be a 16-story building there, which I thought was too high and was trying to get lowered. And he has encouraged the developers there to add 10 stories. So we got a 26-story crass commercial building that is ruining views from all over the place.
Well, Marvin Rees, the mayor, would say, George, actually planning is not down to him. It's down to the planning committee, which is made up of ordinary elected councillors.
Oh, I wish it was. Pressure is being put on by the mayor's office, specifically by Kevin, what's his name, Slocum. And presumably Marvin, the mayor, who is his boss, on the planning process, by the executive. You know, the executive meant to keep out of the planning process. The planning process is a quasi-judicial process that is informed by professional planning officers who are meant to give their professional, unbiased opinion of the suitability of the development. There is no way that the development on the High Street, Wine Street, St Mary Le Port is suitable. It's in a conservation area on the edge of a park. It should respect that. It should rediscover the scale that existed before of a lovely high street looking up from Bristol Bridge up to Christchurch. What it does is obliterates all that and totally loses the scale. I know the architects, they're generally quite good architects. I couldn't believe what I saw when I first saw it before it came to public light. And I said, look, you're just barking up the wrong tree. And yet, it's been given planning permission because planning officers have, in effect, changed what would be their normal advice and persuaded independent councillors who are not meant to take a party view or any direction from the executive to give it planning permission. It is destroying the heart of Bristol.
Well, I mean, it's not realistic, George, is it, really, for you to say, well, we should be comparing what happens next to the buildings that were there before it was bombed in the Blitz. I mean, this isn't... Although, actually, funnily enough, I did see that some European cities, even now, are doing that sort of rebuilding in city centres, so saying, well, it's got to stay in character with what was there before the Second World War.
Yeah.
But this is, you know, you can't surely expect them to rebuild the Dutch house, although that, to be fair, is what some European cities have done, is they have rebuilt these old buildings that they were before the war.
Well, I've got, I've travelled Europe a lot, generally by train. I use photographs of Lübeck, of Gdansk, of other Polish and German cities, part of Berlin even, where they have, out of passion, after the war, Dresden, you know, rebuilt their streets, rebuilt some of their churches. Fortunately, most of our churches still exist, and some as ruins. And it's paid dividends to them. The character of the city is retained, and the economy of the city has benefited as a result. We are killing the golden goose through very, very inappropriate, oversized commercial development that is not about need, it's about greed.
Yeah, but you're talking about the difference between passion and money. Surely there's hardly enough wealth hanging around, and there's not enough, you know, simply cash to be worried so much about passion. This is going to be the money that decides what goes up. I mean, that particular site you're talking about at the western end of Castle Park has been derelict for decades, and something needs to happen there.
Something needs to happen, but that's not an excuse for making something even worse than the dereliction that's there at the moment. What people don't realise, including some of the councillors who voted for it, they do not realise what a huge elephantine scheme that they've given planning permission for. And that is where the planning process has gone wrong, is that good planning officers are not giving a true picture of what's happening. They're not emphasising the heights of these buildings. Nobody told them that it was the equivalent of 15-storey residential buildings that are the height of most of the churches around there, so that they completely obliterate views, not just views of the churches, but the silhouettes of the churches when you're looking up Corn Street or from anywhere in the city. This is going to be a huge block that darkens the old city and looms over it. It is extraordinary, and it will. Bristol will suffer as a result.
Well, there's another aspect to what's been going on, speculation and development-wise in Bristol, and the look of the city into the future over the next decades and 100 years or so, or maybe even longer, and that is the use of public land, that is land owned by central government or the city council, for these sorts of speculative developments rather than public space. And I know there's a few places that have somehow shifted from being set aside for whether it's art galleries, museums, or anything that's going to be something that public are going to be welcome to, can enjoy, maybe of a charitable nature, maybe not, but anyway, open to the public. And now it seems that some of those have been rather sneakily, I have to say, changed from bits of land set aside for public space to now being sold off to private developers.
Yeah, well, one of the most sneaky ones is on the harbourside, where there is a scheme called Waterfront Place, which is on the site of what was going to be the Centre of Performing Arts, before the money was withdrawn. For 25 years, that has been allocated as a cultural site for public benefit. Now there is a planning application going in for a 6 or 7 story office block with cafes underneath it. Not one home, because the argument for height that Marvin puts forward is one of the need for homes across the city, and yet that is a council-owned site. It was the subject of a secretive competition between developers. We have not been allowed to see the results of the other competitors, so we have nothing to compare it with. It's a deal that's been done between the city and commercial agents. It offers nothing back to the city except an oversized block of offices that are going to spoil views, when it could so easily serve a much more public use and be a public space.
Yeah, but
it could be a public internal or external
Yeah, but there's
space.
no other person wants to develop that land at the moment, George, as far as I know.
Oh, that is not the point. When you've got a precious site like that, you wait for the right thing to come along. And if you don't do that, if you go and take up sites like that, for big office buildings. And what the real irony is that Lloyd's are emptying their 120,000 square feet
right
next door.
Yeah.
And what we're likely to end up with is a new office block that presumably will be filled up with some institutional use, and with a massive, great empty office block next door to it with a huge problem. So of course there are uses that you could develop on that side, and you could relate it to the whole issue of slavery that we've been talking about, and Colston and what have you. I mean, I think that Bristol needs something that's not going to be determined by me or anybody else. We need something that is of global significance, that is different to what Liverpool has in terms of a museum of slavery, different to what London has in terms of an archive, but is a major statement about Bristol's role and looks to the future about human rights, about civil rights, and I think Bristol is now in a wonderful position to do that, and this could be part of the reparations that I talked about.
Yeah, and I think it all actually links back further than Edward Colston's time, right the way back to Cabot and Bristol's role in the discovery of North America, which led to a horrific genocide in North and South America of Native Americans. So, there's actually quite a lot of history to get into there if you dare step that way.
Yeah.
But the Colston Memorial itself, I mean, that's something a lot of people have been talking about in the city for a long time, the idea of having some sort of, not Colston Memorial, but a permanent memorial to the slave trade, and including a bit of dirt dishing on Edward Colston himself, no doubt. But the statue, this is just taking us back there for a second. The statue is now hidden away. There's actually thousands of people around the world that would like to come to Bristol to see that. Now the COVID regulations are starting to open up and they can start to travel again. This is actually a massive tourist attraction. The idea of a statue that used to be standing up, that you try and make it stand up now and it falls over, and it's in a museum.
It was a great success when it was on show in Emshed, and I went to have a look at it, and I think it was really well done, actually. I have to take my hat off to the museum about the way they dealt with that. I think that could be the beginning of something much bigger.
It's probably Bristol's most valuable piece of bronze.
Well, funny enough, I said right to begin with, what these people have done is raise its value. So I totally agree with Martin about that. They've enormously raised its value. The judge said that the jury weren't allowed to take that into account, which was a very odd judgment, I thought. But who am I to judge the law?
I think the jury raised their eyebrows at that.
Well, they didn't get to hear it.
But what is what is brilliant about a jury decision is it doesn't form a precedent. And all this argument, then anybody can take down any statue and use that decision as a precedent is a load of rot. It's not a precedent for anything. That is a decision about that particular case, about the history behind it, about the passion within the city, and I think the jury represented that extraordinarily well. I mean, of course, whatever way it fell, there were going to be unhappy people, but the fact that they came to that decision, I think, has helped heal. And I think the interpretation of that's followed has helped people understand that you don't just take down any old statue just because you feel aggrieved.
Yeah, it's an anti-racist statement. It's a doing your research on history statement. I think it's actually sent out some fantastic ripples around the world, as Christine was saying. But look, back to today, and what about this whole process of how we offer in the city, offer bits of land up for speculation and for development? Because it does seem as if this process is becoming, you just touched on it there, less and less transparent all the time.
Yeah.
You know, it's got to be something which is transparent. We heard about the lack of transparency at Temple Islands, a massive development which was going to be the arena, which is now being developed by the developers and the university.
Well, don't hold your breath. I don't think that is going to be developed in the way that we've been told it's going to be developed. I think that there is still, I don't think that deal is complete. Part of the deal is that Bristol guarantees the office rents for 40 years. Bristol, the city, you, me, we are guaranteeing the office rents for 40 years. That was a fiddle, it was a diddle, it was arranged in order to justify the moving of the arena out to Filton. And I think that is absolutely unforgivable, and I think that the mayor has a lot to answer for there. Of course it angered me, because we were so close to being able to deliver that arena. It was ready to go, we had a fixed price, and now that was dishonestly blocked by a stitch-up between the mayor and YTL.
Well, that's another merchant venturer, YTL. And they do still have quite a lot of clout in this city. Is it Colin Skellett, I think, the chair? But what about other parts of the city? Western Harbour is a massive project. Every time I go into that part of the city, round Hot Wells, I'm looking at it thinking, well, nothing seems to have changed around here yet. Is this going to happen? Because it's a very, very ambitious project. Lots and lots of dense high-rises there.
Yeah, well, I've not seen the physical proposal yet. All I've seen is a crazy road proposal for a new bridge closer to the suspension bridge, which nobody with any understanding or love for Bristol could possibly propose it. How on earth it ever got an airing, I don't know.
Well, some people would say the same about the existing system. You know, if you've got the suspension bridge in the background, that would be built in the 60s or 70s, I imagine. Then you've got this kind of modern motorway thing right in front of it. But people would say the same about that, George, at the time.
This is twice as close, if that's an expression. No, it's much closer to and it was totally impractical. So I think we can take that huge thing with a pinch of salt. That's not going to happen, or whatever the mayor thinks. And I think we're now entered a process because of the cock-up over the consultation, which was a real cock-up. I think we've now entered a process that gives the opportunity for something more sensible to emerge.
Okay, so are there any other areas of building and development in the future of the city that you want to point out? Because those seem to be the main ones. I mean, we were talking about Castle Park earlier, this massive building on Castle Park, which was built on the old ambulance station, again, ex-public property.
Well, I think the galleries are going to be redeveloped. I think that Debenhams is going to be redeveloped with another high building, the galleries with another high building on the other side of Castle Park. And there is this vision that, an idiotic vision, that Castle Park could be Bristol's Central Park, like Manhattan.
Oh, no.
And it's a bonkers proposition. But anyway, people buy into the rhetoric of that, especially the developers. And the city, have some of that, own some of that land, and yet they're encouraging these high buildings around Castle Park.
Well, it's shocking. It's amazing. What is this obsession? Maybe, Martin Summers, you can help us out here with the United States. It seems that everything is being done on a US model. I keep switching on the World Service, hearing American accent-voiced BBC reporters. I keep hearing, or even on Radio 4, lots and lots of US accents. It seems as if there's a kind of colonisation going on here.
Well, I mean, that's a much bigger question, the cultural influence of the United States in Britain.
Well, I mean, it's the basic thing is the mayor, isn't it? The whole system where George represents the first of this new type of mayor. That's an American system too.
Well, indeed. I mean, I'm listening with great interest to all of this because obviously I don't actually research a lot of this thoroughly myself. I think the problem for Marvin, from my point of view, is that because of the central government grant for local authorities being savaged away for things like special needs children and so on, that the having these figurehead mayors, they then feel that they've got to be entrepreneurial. They've got to go out and do stuff so that they can then generate revenue to do the stuff that they used to do automatically because they were just given the money by central government. This is for special needs children. Get on and spend it. And instead of challenging that central government, because of course ultimately this idea of places competing with each other for money, we see this in the levelling up money that the Tories are handing out, but they're making sure that it only goes to people they like and only for stuff that they want. It should be, I'm basically a centralist, I'm a socialist. We should basically plan everything from the centre in terms of making sure that poor communities like Middlesbrough or South Wales don't lose out. Relatively wealthy communities like Bristol shouldn't have an advantage. And then, of course, leave it to local people to decide what they want to spend that money on. And, of course, this whole obsession with entrepreneurialism by chief executives of cities, that isn't the role of local government.
Yeah, I think you're right, Martin. It takes two forms. It's the setting up of companies like Bristol Energy, which has been a bloody disaster, which I have to take some of the blame for. But then throwing good money after bad, having clearly made a mistake, is unforgivable.
Well, why didn't you shut it down before you left office, George?
Well, because it only just started. I mean, it was fine to begin with. It got its 200,000 customers that we were aiming for and everything, and then the situation changed and energy became more expensive and lots of people went into it. We did a lot better than Nottingham, for instance, who set up their own energy company called Robin Hood, I think it was, and which probably was a suitable name. Anyway, it was, I admit my mistakes. That was a mistake in hindsight. But when you see it losing millions, then to throw more millions at it is double jeopardy, really. So,
I suppose to excuse you a bit,
that.
You do need to throw money at something to get it started, and that's what you were doing in your place.
I threw money at it to get it started. I forget what it was. Promises. It was low millions, but very, tens and tens of millions were thrown at it after that, that was when that was when the loss had become really visible. And there was never an intention to subsidise it by that amount. And the other thing is property. I think we've done some quite good land buying. For instance, I bought a lot of the land when I was mayor around the station, and that's been an amazing investment. I mean, the 100 Temple Street, which is the council offices down there, is probably, we bought it for 20 million. It's probably worth about 50 million now because of the sites that are still available around it. We bought the old mailbox office, what was it called? The Royal Mail office behind the station. We sold that on to the university. That has enabled the university to come up with a plan for a second campus, which I think is probably a good thing for Bristol in terms of our economy and our reputation. So I think the city has a part to play in that sort of use of land, but just to pretend that they're a commercial developer, both of those were for a real purpose, but just to enter the game of being a commercial developer, I think is probably a bit dodgy.
Well, definitely. We've got the budget going through at the moment. Apparently it's going to hit motorists very hard. The whole idea of, you set up these resident parking zones. Now, apparently no one's going to be able to park in there for for 30 minutes. So the residents will still get the ability to park there, but they're starting to use the whole idea of parking a car. It's almost like the council's starting to turn into some sort of car parking management company, because it's the easiest way to get revenue. It's
not about revenue. I mean, revenue helps to pay for the system.
But they say there's a £19.5 million gap, so they're going to have to ramp up all the parking charges right across the city to fill it.
But parking is a very good way of dealing with traffic in the city. If you make it more difficult for commuters to park, you're going to reduce the number of people coming in just as a single driver with no passengers every morning. And 85% of those cars that come in the morning from outside the city and try and get into the centre have one person in them. And so using parking, and I did it, and I'm proud of what I did, helps to reduce the availability of parking for those people who are driving from outside, so that they're more encouraged to use the park and ride, to share journeys, to reduce the pollution in the city, which is the whole purpose of the clean air zone. I think we're going to move to much more sophisticated methods, like London are beginning to move, so that every journey is charged independently according to the traffic, the pollution, everything like happens in Singapore. So I think there will be more to come. But, my vision was for a city that is really good to walk around, for children to play in, for people to go safely from home to school and back. And I think if you make a city that's good and safe for children, that has clean air to breathe, you're making it a really good city for everybody.
Yeah, at the same time, opening up these incinerators downwind of us, down at Avonmouth. These things burning plastic. Apparently the filters filter out all the toxins, but that seems a little bit hypocritical to me. We're talking about we've got to have a clean city, whilst there's a lot of hand clapping for the new incinerators. And in some parts of the world, actually, I remember this is a story from way back in 2019 in Wuhan, where apparently this virus all started. There was a massive protest in Wuhan, in China, about an incinerator. These are not popular because they do chuck out toxic waste into the atmosphere.
I haven't looked recently at the situation of the incinerator at Avonmouth, but
well, I'll let you
you're right. We need the science.
So on transport generally, look, the main problem here is people want decent, reliable public transport.
Yes.
Then they'll leave the car at home. And if it
no, they won't. No? They won't. You need a combination of carrot and stick, and I think you have to restrict the amount of use of the car as well as attracting people into public transport. Without the stick, the carrot won't work.
Well, I can remember interviewing a guy called Colin Force, who was a steam driver in the 1960s here in Bristol, who was saying we had a fantastic suburban railway network. All sorts of loads of people came into the city centre by train. We had a terrific bus network where all the thousands or tens of thousands of people that worked up at Filton could get backwards and forwards. They had loads of extra buses at the beginnings and the starts of the shift, and it all worked. This is before people had cars almost.
That's right. That's the secret of it. Before they had cars, they weren't tempted to jump in their car. Now nearly everybody's got cars.
Yeah.
They all jump in. Well, they're tempted to jump in their car because, it is a good rain shield. It does, it's a comfortable way of coming in, but it's not creating a better world. And in fact, what's gone wrong physically with our cities, I put down to the growth of the motor car.
Well, it might also be simply the cost of the public transport as well. Just earlier this week on Radio Bristol, BBC Radio Bristol, and the BBC seem to be fighting at the moment to sort of keep their credibility going because of all the attacks on Nadine Dorries. The Culture Secretary has been saying, well, we're going to try and scrap the licence fee and make it not illegal to not pay your licence fee for the BBC, etc. So it was good good to hear a bit of really, I think, good journalism. But of course, to do that, you need to have the right people in. And so, on Monday, the morning show had the boss of First Bus on there. He's not actually been in the job all that long. The guy's name is Doug Clarimbold, and here he is fielding a question. Actually, a very long and complicated and rather devastating question from the vice chair of the Portishead Town Council, Paul Gardner, about why it is they have so many problems with public transport down there.
I was also just asked to tell people what the cuts are in Portishead. Although there's been a lot of press about no services going through the marina, which is having a huge impact on a lot of elderly and vulnerable residents who now feel they're going to be imprisoned in their flats. We've also got no services now through the western north of Portishead, so people won't be able to get to Western College. Ironically, I know someone who got a place at Western College on the same day the cuts were announced, so they can't actually get there. And we've got residents unable to get to Gordano School, which has got 2,000 students. So these are really quite massive cuts from Portishead, and our email is red hot, and our postbag very full. My question to Doug is, given the huge impacts on our residents' lives, would you engage in an open dialogue and a public meeting with the town to talk about reversing these cuts and instead putting in some improved services?
Doug Claringbold.
Yeah, we're very happy to consult, and yeah, we'll come to a meeting and discuss that. I think people got to understand that there's the real challenges, and we're deeply apologetic for those who are inconvenienced by the changes. But it's very interesting that actually, we have to create a network which works for the majority of people. And actually, in terms of the marina, take the point around the marina, trying to get buses around the marina has been troubling for a number of years. And we've even had, I listened to a report on BBC Radio Bristol, when one of your Vox Pops was basically telling about how a car had to be lifted by a forklift truck to get the bus, to enable the bus to get through. These problems haven't gone away. And, your previous caller was about reliability of services. And if we want to run reliable services throughout the route, then we need to look at areas which are hugely problematic and can cause significant disruption and delay. So what we've actually done is reconfigured the service X3. What that actually means is that certain parts of Portishead takes 10 minutes less time to get into the centre of Bristol than it did before. So, but I completely accept the point, and this is why we work with North Somerset. So North Somerset are going to put a service on which covers the marina. People will be able to change onto the new service X5.
Let's park the marina to one side, because that has been an ongoing problem. Yeah. I live there myself. The roads are badly designed. North Somerset need to also get a grip with regard to traffic enforcement there. Let's just park all that to one side. Because if you've got people who can't go to Western College, if you've got children who can't go to Gordano School, which is a very successful school, and you've got the largest town in North Somerset not being serviced by its bus routes, and you've got the chair of the town council saying it's not good enough, it isn't good enough, Doug Claringbold.
Yeah, I think we don't operate in isolation in terms of the discussions that we have. So we have been in significant conversation with North Somerset County Council over our service provision, which is why, for example, they are putting on a bus service in the marina. Okay. Yeah, we submit changes, which then there is a process which we go through. So those services changes get approved. So, yes, will I come to a public consultation? Will we come to a public consultation? Yes, we will.
Well, that's good news, Paul, but are you concerned that North Somerset seem to have gone, oh, that's all right then?
Well, definitely, because the first we heard about it was on social media. So it's interesting that Doug said he's had extensive conversations with North Somerset Council, because none of the 6 district councillors for Portishead or any of the town councillors knew anything about this until it was on social media, which is particularly disappointing, because 2 years ago, when the same cuts were mooted, we had some really productive conversations with First Bus, which resulted in the cuts not being made and some other adjustments happening.
Okay.
So the lack of communication this time has been disappointing, to say the least.
So that's the Vice Chair of Portishead Town Council, just down the road, George, talking about first group, first bus. I mean, really, they're in a situation, they go on in the discussion to talk about, really, you're just, all you're really concerned about is your shareholders. And if it's, you're not making enough money on a route, it's simply not going to happen.
Well, it was a huge mistake to privatise the bus services, and Bristol used to have as you said, it used to have a really extensive service. And of course, Portishead needs a railway line, and that was promised by 2019, to open by 2019. That has been, the rug's been pulled, and so I don't know when that's going to happen.
The car drivers are sort of a captive market. You know, there's got to be, working alternatives. Otherwise, people are just going to cling to the car.
Yeah. I mean, you can get by bus from Portishead. I've gone out to Portishead by bus. I've cycled out there quite easily as well. I mean,
in London, there is better public transport, much better public transport. It's not easy using your Oyster card, this sort of thing. And a lot of people have given up their cars. They simply have, because the public transport's there.
I'm thinking it'd be mad to own a car in London, and most European capitals, it'd be mad to own a car, because public transport is so much better. London is richer, more population, it can fill its buses, so it is more challenging in a metro district that is that maybe hasn't got the same sort of density as some of these other European cities that we're talking about.
Now, we've also got a referendum coming up in May. Now, we must just broach that one, because this is about whether there's actually going to be a mayor or not. And it'd be interesting to hear from you what you make of the reasons for and against having a mayor.
I have one overriding positive reason that we shouldn't continue with the mayoral system. I supported the idea of there being a referendum after 10 years because I didn't know what it was going to look like.
But you hang on, George, because you're almost voting yourself out of a job. It's a job you did, and you're saying actually it was no good.
Yeah, but then the situation's changed enormously. We didn't have metro mayors. And when you look at the really successful city regions, they're the ones who have got a metro mayor and a cabinet that is made up of the leaders of the district councils that make up that metropolitan area. And so that is a much more democratic job. It's a much more, it's got much more authority. It's got more powers. It can gather powers in terms of housing, for instance, that should be on a metropolitan district area rather than within the artificial boundaries of a city like Bristol. When the city has burst beyond its boundaries, I mean, a quarter or a third of the city is now in South Gloucestershire. And so it is right, I think, that we invest these powers in the metro mayor, and I would include health and police and all those other things that Andy Burnham, for instance, who is the Prime Minister of the North now, and Andy Street, a different party, who is the Prime Minister of the Midlands, we would have a much better relationship with government if we didn't have two competing mayors, and the mayor of Bristol constantly undermining the role of the metropolitan mayor, Dan Norris, who I think is frustrated at not being able to get the same level of attention in the interests of the Bristol and Bath City region than the Midlands and Northern mayors do.
Martin Summers, you've been sort of quite against this whole idea of having a mayor, haven't you, for quite a while? Well,
I think it was an innovation too far.
But
really.
Why? Could you give us the why?
Because the basic structure of having committees to decide things is the British way. The only thing that I find advantageous about having the mayoral system was the fact that there was a single transferable vote, which opened the thing up. But of course, Priti Patel is now talking about getting rid of that, so you could easily end up with an all-powerful mayor, elected on a fraction of the electorate. And that really is worrying, because that's centralising all the power in the hands of one person, and they haven't actually got a mandate. And of course, it's also caused a problem, because inevitably the local councillors feel that they should have a say, but they can be overruled by the elected mayor because they've got a different mandate. And obviously, Marvin hasn't come on this programme for years, but he would say, well, in many ways, I won the election last May. And that is true. The transferable vote, he did win it. And that he would argue that gives me my mandate, and the local councillors. I mean, if we do go back to having a non-mayoral system, those local councillors will still be elected on first past the post, which leads to all sorts of distortions. Ultimately, we need a written constitution for our society, like they have in other European countries, instead of continuously bodging with new bits of bodge on here and a new bit of bodge on there.
Yeah. And I think there is a perception that the committee system doesn't produce a leader. A leader comes out of the committee system that is elected by the councillors. It's a much more democratic way of providing your leader.
Ken Livingstone, when he was at his most radical, running the GLC, he was the leader of the Labour group. And he actually opposed the idea of elected mayors, although he eventually stood and won the post. Because you've got to actually carry people with you in that situation.
Absolutely.
You can't override them.
Absolutely. And, I felt that a mayor has a responsibility to the whole council, which is why I had 4 different parties on my cabinet. And I embraced disagreement, but I can't remember any decision that wasn't taken without a majority agreement of the cabinet. Now, in spite of a promise to continue with some element of that system from the current mayor, he completely abolished having any other parties in his cabinet because he didn't like them disagreeing with him. Well, I find that really weak.
Well, it's also a way of patronising certain councillors to keep a kind of small group of councillors who are loyal to you. This is another thing that some of the Labour councillors have said, that because they get actually paid quite a bit more for being in the cabinet, the Mayor Marvin Rees has been able to say, well, you are my favourites, and if you're a good boy, a good girl, you do as I say, you say as I want you to say, then you'll be brought in on this little group. And I noticed that one of those, I think, is it Nicola Beach, has got herself quite a nice job outside the council now, working for one of these. I think it was
Helen.
One of the other ones,
Helen
anyway.
Holland, the other Helen.
Anyway, so I mean, this is a sort of, this is rather dangerous because some of these jobs can then just become a sort of revolving door into whatever industry it is they're managing, rather than an attempt to, gain credibility, gain votes in the next election. The next election, your cabinet member might not be there to be elected anymore. They might have got themselves a job somewhere else. Anyway, what about the zoo as well? Because I know you've got a campaign on about the zoo. This is unbelievable, really, that the oldest provincial zoo in the world, Bristol Zoo, being sold off for luxury flats.
I think it's appalling. I just couldn't believe it when it was first proposed. And yet it's becoming common currency that somehow the zoo is entitled to planning permission for a posh housing estate because they need the money. That has never been a planning reason. And they've already got an offer of over 12 million for their car park, which has planning permission, and they were advised that might fetch about 8 million. So they're doing very nicely. And we could, with our world project, which is, would be a world first. It would be another first for Bristol. It would be building on our reputation as being the Hollywood of natural history filming. It would build on the technical advances that we're making in the university and tech companies in the area. It's a perfect fit for Bristol. That can provide the money the zoo first thought they needed. But there is a danger now that they've got these pound signs in their eyes, and all that they will accept is a housing development. I am relying on the planning committee councillors seeing that would be a huge lost opportunity and a criminal waste of these historic zoological gardens, and which are the only reason why many people come to Clifton and are able to enjoy it. Otherwise, Clifton is simply a posh housing estate with expensive schools and specialty shopping. The zoo is the reason why people otherwise come to Clifton, and I think, while I totally understand that zoos, as we know them, have had their day, urban zoological gardens are a wonderful opportunity to increase the biodiversity to educate in a true manner rather than just gawping at animals in cages, using the new technologies in order to create augmented reality, to connect with other habitats across the world. This is a really exciting possibility.
But where's your money, George? Are they simply going to be able to get away with this planning permission? We've been hearing earlier on about some of the very strange decisions that Bristol City Council's planning committee have been passing.
Well, it's quite obvious that the zoo have been promised a planning permission by the mayor's office, because they are very confident about
bizarre,
it,
isn't it? But hang on,
that
because
is illicit.
Well, they're not supposed to. The mayor's office is not in charge of planning.
No,
how has that happened?
I know, it's corrupting the system.
How have we come to this?
No, we are. I'm afraid it is corrupting the system. The mayor's office should not be dealing directly with applicants of this sort, of any sort. And yet I was warned never ever to give the impression that I could in any way influence a planning decision, which is an independent quasi-judicial process. And so I do believe that system has been corrupted under the current mayor.
Well, it does seem it makes a big difference, not necessarily what party you're in or whether you're an independent or not, but the personality of the mayor can make an enormous difference. I look at you, George, and I wonder whether you were almost like a Trojan horse to get this system in. Oh, everyone would embrace George as mayor. He's a very reasonable chap, open-minded, an open person generally, and now we've gone to another system, a completely different system, where almost a placeman for, it could be a placewoman, why not, for the speculators, the people who want to make money out of Bristol. They're not really interested in the people, that someone would be there to act for them rather than for the population.
Well, I think business has a place as a place in the city's economy, but I think it becomes very uncomfortable when there is too close a relationship between the business and the executive running the city. And I think that's what's happened, and that hidden underneath the sort of one city programme is a nod and a wink understanding between business and the mayor's office. And I think that is really unhealthy, and that is resulting in these huge developments.
Well, that is exactly how it runs in the United States of America. This is, you get these mayors, like Mayor Daley used to run Chicago, and so on, and that is exactly what happens. And it's been there for decades.
That's legal and open there. It's not legal here.
Well, it may be so, but I mean that's trying to graft something that's foreign onto a different kind of base,
right.
Isn't it?
It is the Americanization of our system.
It's horrific. What we see, of course, is most of the big American cities, New York, Chicago, have their whole sort of ghettoized areas. Let's hope that doesn't happen here, but it certainly seems that might be the way it's going. George, I wonder if you can stay with us for a few more minutes, because I want to have a look at a couple of sort of more general stories. I mean, because it's, in a way, it's kind of detached from many people's lives, talking about the look of the city in the future. Most people are concerned about literally paying the rent, paying the electricity bills, trying to live day to day in a system which seems to be working against them. And here is a clip from Prime Minister's Questions this week, one of the MPs from the North East, talking about the massive debt that some of the people up there are having to suffer. And of course, this is the same right across the country. We're hearing so much about, the doubling of gas bills. What on earth is going on? So let's have a listen to that and get your comments on the general state of affairs when it comes to people just simply being able to live in this country and in this city.
Twist. Mr. Speaker, my constituents are rightly angry at the Prime Minister's behaviour. But while Downing Street fights to save his political life, people across the North East are worrying about rising food and energy bills, rising unemployment and rising levels of child poverty. He talks about levelling up, but my constituents are seeing opportunities cut. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that his government has failed and it's time for him to go?
No, Mr. Speaker, I really don't agree with her, and I don't think she could have been following anything that's been said this afternoon. We have unemployment falling to near record lows, Mr. Speaker, and we have job vacancies. We have job vacancies at record highs, Mr. Speaker. That's what Conservative governments do. They create jobs and they get the economy moving.
Well, I think we're in a very difficult position now as a country, because a number of factors, including Brexit and COVID, have created a perfect storm. Interest rates may be raised by the Bank of England going forward, because that's the sort of thing the City of London wants to see. But that could easily lead to a situation where all of this debt that's been built up over the years collapses the economy.
Yeah, we're hearing 5% or so inflation. The wages are not increasing at all.
No, real wages are going down, and the unemployment figures are being massaged, if you like, by a lot of people leaving the workforce.
And in April, with the energy prices going up considerably, I guess that we're going to reach something closer to 7% inflation, and that is, that's so damaging. Bristol may not be the northeast, but if you're poor in Bristol, you are really poor, because you're probably paying higher rent. You've got, because we're a rich city, living without money becomes more difficult. So I think we're going to see some real hardship in this city, and it really, really worrying. So levelling up isn't about north and south. It's about areas, wards, really close to each other, where you have extremes of wealth and poverty. And that's what one city should be about, is addressing that issue.
Also, we've got this police courts and evidence bill going through. Some people calling it the police state bill, George. Bristol is quite a centre for protest, as we've seen with Colston. Yeah. And almost every group, whether it's the Palestinian campaigners, anti-lockdown campaign, whatever, they like to come to Bristol to do their protests. We're now seeing absolutely unbelievable changes to the way protests are being managed as this bill of Priti Patel's goes through. The idea being basically the police can prescribe, you will do your protest from these hours to these hours at this volume and no more. And if you step anywhere outside that, we're going to arrest you. It sounds to me like a recipe for filling up our jails. It's
a very authoritarian bill, and I find it really worrying. I think it moves us closer to the police state that some of these people want, and Priti Patel is a dreadful influence on it all. So I know that the Lords have tried to moderate it. I hope that has been
this is
successful.
amazing in itself, isn't it? That you've got the feudal House of Lords. Well, most of them actually are life peers, but you've got a feudal house, which is the only moderating influence. It's bizarre.
No, but I'm proud of Bristol's role as a city of protest. I wrote a letter to the Times about it, and got a lot of support. And I think protest is an important part of a democracy. And when the government thinks that they're in charge and they don't have to hear protest, then they get worse and worse and more insular and more authoritarian. It's a very dangerous way to go.
And I imagine there'll be protests about it. Of course, this Kill the bill not being the police, the nickname for the police, this being the actual bill itself, which the protesters are trying to kill. Martin, it would become a crime to fail to follow restrictions the protesters ought to have known about, even if they had not received an order from the police. Now, this is, I call this the telepathy clause. So you've got this ridiculous situation where people are going to be arrested, so a policeman will grab them from behind. They've got no idea what they've been arrested for, just for being there.
Well, I don't think there's any pressure from the police for these powers. This is very much a political démarche by the government. And I remember a demonstration here in Bristol some years ago now where BAE Systems had brought in all these people from all over the world who were experts on drones. And the counter-protesters, they actually had it in the centre of Bristol. It was very unwise of them, right in some offices in the centre of Bristol. And, the sort of anti-war movement in Bristol realised that they were going to have this conference about drones, and this was at the height of drones being used to kill people in countries all over the world. And, of course, drones can be used for all sorts of things.
Oh, no, you're going to tell me you droned them out, are you?
Well, no, that's right. We all turned up, and we made them, and there was a punk band, there's Rita Lynch's band, there was a sound system, there was everybody banding pots and pans, and they couldn't have their meeting. And the police went in, and they said to the police, can't you make these people go away? And the police said, no, protests can be loud. They can. It's your fault for having your protest in a place where they can do that. You should have done it somewhere in the country where they couldn't get... And the police were very, very good about it. They said no, and they said, look, you can carry on making as much noise as you like, as long as you don't break anything. But that's fine. And they eventually had to leave. And it was filmed by ITV, and I went to interview the ITV, and BAE Systems were run out of town on television.
Yeah, I think this is going to provoke... more protests.
Yeah, if the police try and arrest people, then they're going to have a confrontation.
So it is a highly provocative move by a government that wants to control us.
Well, there was a protest last Saturday at 1 o'clock, as we announced on this show last week. Kill the Bill protest, peaceful, very peaceful. Outside the main police station in the city centre here, Bridewell, New Bridewell, with something like 1,000, probably a few more people just sitting there looking at the police station and saying, you really, really want... Because it seems to me that this is designed to create kind of running battles, George, almost.
I mean, if anything would make me chain myself to railings is being told that it's against the law to chain myself to railings. You know, the suffragettes would never have been able to get votes for women if they hadn't been able to make those sort of moves. And so this is... this is moving us into dark ages.
Just looking, digging into some of the clauses here, the basics. The police will be able to impose a start and finish time on all protests, to set the noise limits, and apply these rules to demonstrations by even just one person. Martin.
Yes, well, demonstrations by one person can often be very, very effective. You know, people think that that's not. You know, a one person who does a very powerful demonstration can change the world, you know.
But I don't think they're going to be looking at that in Bristol in the years to come. If this goes through, it's going to be demonstrations of hundreds and thousands of people. What
worries me is if we do have a major economic crisis, people are going to go into the streets in a much more militant mood than they might do about other things. And you're setting a potential for confrontations between communities and within communities and with the police. And, you know, people need to read their history about what happened in Northern Ireland in the 1960s and understand that that is perfectly possible.
But, I mean, you just spelled out a few minutes ago the economic challenges people are facing, the fact that, you know, that people are being driven into debt. Surely this is exactly the sort of thing that is going to bring them out on the streets in the future.
Well, one of the problems you're going to find is...
It's almost like this is, the government is doing this to try and cover themselves for this failure to provide people with the pound in their pocket.
The other thing they've done, which isn't in this bill, is they've made the police, the army and the intelligence services above the law, up to and including murdering people. I mean, people in Ireland are very well aware of what the implications of that are.
This is the covert sources bill that went through last year, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, the one of the main things of the last couple of weeks, it's been driving me mad because I don't think Boris is going. But yeah, all the media seems to be saying, "Oh, Boris has got to go. Boris has got to go." Anyway, this came to a head this week at Prime Minister's Questions, and we'll say goodbye to George Ferguson now. I mean, you could say something about whether you think Boris is going to go, George, before you're off, if you like.
Well, what worries me is what follows him. If he goes, it doesn't make a lot of difference because we've got a load of very dangerous people behind him. There are one or two that wouldn't be so bad, though. So let's hope.
Yeah, this is the thing that amazes me about the London media is they have these calls for it's very much, you know what it's like. It's a bit like the whole situation in Libya with Gaddafi. You know, we're hearing Gaddafi's got to go, well, what's happened now? You've got a whole bunch of nutters and warlords and gangsters running riot all over the country. So why don't we journalists, excuse me, please think about the consequences of what we're calling for. Anyway, let's have a listen. Thanks very much for joining us anyway, George Ferguson.
A pleasure, Tony.
And, well, Martin and I, in a minute, will discuss, this is a clip from Prime Minister's Questions, where Keir Starmer tries to pin it on Boris.
Keir Starmer. Well, I know it's not going well, Prime Minister, but look on the bright side. At least the staff at Number 10 know how to pack a suitcase. Mr. Speaker, last year...